Okay, good day and welcome to today's LEAD360 Her Leadercast. My name is Dorinda Walker and I am head of programming for LEAD360 and the host of this Leadercast series designed specifically for Black women in leadership. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, who may not be familiar with LEAD360, we are a professional development organization dedicated to the advancement of Black middle managers and senior leaders. In the words of our founder and CEO, Dr. Eric Walton, we believe that Black leaders matter. And that's why I'm proud to announce that we have redesigned our professional development training to be delivered virtually to our corporate clients. So if you're a leader looking to invest in culturally relevant leadership training for Black talent within your organization, be sure to inquire with us about our Win Academy Executive Leadership Program. The training addresses the general manager competencies, including the vital importance of building a solid financial acumen and the cultural navigation required specifically for Black leaders. Our curriculum is focused on enhancing the language of business through a strong financial lens, examining where leaders are on the agile leadership spectrum and how to enhance those competencies in their personal development. And speaking of leadership, I am thrilled to have three phenomenal women with me today who are not only demonstrating tremendous leadership throughout their careers, but have broken barriers and blazed trails in an industry where Black women are significantly underrepresented in leadership. These women defied the odds and empowered themselves to challenge the status quo. Please join me in welcoming Paulette Brown, Senior Partner and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Lock Lord, Michelle Meyership, Principal and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at KPMG, and Alnisa Bell, Partner and Labor and Employment Attorney at Seyfarth Shaw. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you
for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
I'm going to get right to it, but I want to start off with a personal question before we get into the career discussion. The current state of racial injustice in our country has taken an emotional toll on everyone who wants to see an end to racial discrimination, but it's been particularly hard on us as a Black community. And there's been so much written about the emotional, impact and effects on Black professionals and having to maintain their professionalism at work. So I want to hear from you guys. How are you coping and how is this impacting your family and your work life? And Michelle, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Dorinda. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I think for me, I would say the last 5 weeks, I would describe my feelings as being that of grieving. And when you think about the stages of grief, right, it's kind of like you're in denial and then you accept and then you have to figure out how to cope through it. That's what I've been through all of that. I've been through periods of pain, worry, fear, and now I'm feeling more cautiously optimistic about the future in light of the things I've seen over the last couple of weeks. As a mom of 3 Black young men, ages 18, 19, and 22, my particular angst is around them and their well-being. So I try to every day find the silver linings. I try to be grounded in my faith and be prayerful that they will be covered and protected by our Savior. And I try to remain positive with my mindset and not get caught up in the negativity. That's how I've been trying to navigate through this thus far.
As Black women, we rely on our faith. So thank you for sharing that. Alnisa, how about you?
I think similar. For me, this hit particularly hard. And I will have to say, I think I'm one of those people who tries to be so focused all the time. And a lot of times when things like this happen, I try to compartmentalize and separate myself from it and not really focus on it, right? And I talked to, the firm had like a therapist come and talk to their Black professionals. And one thing that the person said was that, sort of being numb to things that you hear in the news is a form of trauma, right? And I think oftentimes as Black people, we don't think of it that way, right? We see this happen over and over and over again. And the natural reaction is to be angry and to be upset and be sad. but there's also the reaction of sort of being numb, right? And it's sort of, trying to protect yourself in a way. But it's traumatizing, and I think this one hit me a lot because we were going through a lot with COVID, right? There were which disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities, right? People were literally dying, saying they couldn't breathe. And to see this man in the street, dying, saying he can't breathe, and bring up those sort of images from Eric Garner, it was a lot, and so like Michelle, I went through all of those stages, and I was shocked because I honestly have never felt something so visceral before. It was just a lot for me to deal with, and luckily I haven't had to have those conversations with my little ones because they're only 5 and 1. But I know that those conversations will happen, and it's sad because as a mom, you're just like, why is it that your kids have to be told these things and take away sort of their youthfulness and their innocence? And so that's something that I struggle with, knowing that one day I do have to have those conversations.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I can relate to going numb because I went through that moment where I just didn't even want to talk about it, deal with it or anything. Paulette, how about you?
So thank you, first of all, I'm really pleased to be here this evening. But listening to Michelle and Alnisa, I got a feeling in my chest. And because, every time you talk about it, you live through it again. And so, I actually literally got a pain in my chest. Just listening to Michelle and Alnisa. And, my first reaction is with the multiple murders, and I think we should call them as they are, murders. It's like this was 2014 all over again. And it's like, is this a cycle that every 4 years, this is what we're going to have to deal with? And I thought about also, two things, if there's a silver lining, two things I thought about. One is, thank goodness people have phones to record these things now. Because people would like to deny that they haven't, which is what happened to Aubrey. Before they knew there was a video, they said he was trying to break into somebody's house. And so you have these feelings, and I have a 36-year-old son, and I am always saying, be careful, be careful. Don't watch what you say. You don't have to respond to everything that somebody says. You just don't have to do that. But it also made me think about COVID, as devastating as it has been to the Black and Brown community. It's my belief that if people were not home as a result of COVID, they would not be paying the kind of attention to this as they would have, because this is not the first time these things have happened. This is not the first time people have recorded it with their cameras, but people didn't have anything else to do. They had no basketball to watch, no March Madness. They had none of these other things, no spring training games, none of these things. And so they were almost in essence forced to watch what was going on in real time. And so people are talking about how they say this time is different. I hope it really is different. I can feel a difference than before and other times because people have been forced to pay attention to it. But I think that we have an obligation to continue to push the issue so that it does not end with the news cycle.
I agree. And go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with Paulette too. And I think if you watch carefully the events over the last couple of weeks, the murdering has continued.
Right.
So
Exactly.
let's not forget that, right? So for me, it's, this constant fear of it's like constant. I mean, here in our state of New Jersey, there were 2 murders in the last 2 weeks of Black men outside in the street who were unarmed and not a threat. So it continues. And that's the issue and I think people are seeing it, they're hearing it, they're reading it. So I think it's going to be a little bit harder to walk away now.
Yeah, I agree. But I am optimistic because the young people have really come out in droves, and they're bringing, multiple generations with them. So I'm really optimistic that they're going to help drive the change that we need.
Right.
So thank you for sharing, ladies. I'm going to get into the career discussion now. So Black women continue to be significantly underrepresented, making up 2.8% of associates and 0.75% of partners, and even fewer equity partners, despite the fact that Black women dominate law school enrollments. The three of you have managed to break through those barriers. So tell us about your journey into law, your areas of expertise, and then give us one game-changing moment that propelled your career. And Paulette, I'm going to start with you.
We're starting with me. I'm the oldest go first, I guess. So, so I have been practicing for 44 years. And when you talk about Black women in law school, they have higher numbers than some, but they do not have really high numbers in law school. So, I just want to make that clear. But in terms of them being successful, it makes no sense. So, I'm going to do a little self-promoting here. We just issued a study called Left Out and Left Behind, the Hurdles, Hassles, and Heartbreaks of Women of Color and Their Long-Term Careers in Law, which, it's extremely disappointing that 20 years ago, we were talking about the paucity of women of color and Black women in law firms and in other leadership roles in the legal profession. And we are still at that same place 20 years later. So I think that, hopefully as a part of what's going on, this movement that's occurring now, that will help to change that dynamic. But, women, Black women in particular, we suffer from what I call PIA, prove it again, prove it again, prove it again. We have to prove ourselves over and over and over again. So my trajectory, to your original question, is, I started law school in 1973. I went to Howard University undergrad, and, one of the things at Howard is that nobody ever tells you that you are going to go to grad school or get an additional degree. That's just what you do when you go to Howard. And so my two roommates, I was not, I was going to the School of Social Work, and my two roommates, I have to tell the truth, they came to Howard knowing that they wanted to go to law school. I took some political science courses that were taught by professors at Howard Law School, and I became very intrigued. I felt that I could help more people with a law degree than I could with a social work degree. And so that's what led me on my path. And, I've always been, before there was such a term called diversity and inclusion, really passionate about being inclusive. My father always said, you take people as they come. And he also said there are no girl jobs, no boy jobs, and he lived that. He did everything. He did all the major cooking. He did everything except he could not do our hair. He could not manage that. So my mother had to continue to do that. But there have been a couple of turning points in my life that have had a significant impact on me. And, I just want to say that I have been just so extraordinarily blessed. And, a lot of grace has come into the picture, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I could be. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't know that there were various areas of the practice of law that I could go into. I didn't know what a large law firm was. There were so many things I didn't know, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And one of the things that enlightened me the most was when I attended my first National Bar Association meeting in 1980. And I saw all of these successful Black lawyers. I'm like, what the heck? And I'm like, I'm never gonna leave, And so it was an exposure that I never had, and it was an opportunity for me to see that I could do so much more than I had envisioned for myself. And I, one person, the person I met when I checked into the hotel, Arthenia Joyner, she was a state senator in Florida. She embraced me as I was checking into the hotel. She is like an older sister to me. And before Hidden Figures, she told me I needed to have a strand of pearls. And she gave me a strand of pearls to wear. And it was just, and so you just get that constant feeding from people who are doing wonderful things and also serving the community. Understanding that their law license is more than an instrument where you can make money. Sure, it's good to make money. I'm with that. But it's also an instrument to do good, to help other people. And that was a real turning point for me when I went to my first National Bar Association meeting.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's a wonderful story. Alnisa, how about you?
So I always knew from when I was a young girl that I wanted to be a lawyer. And like I said, I'm sort of one of those people that has this path and I stick with it. I went to law school at Rutgers. I did my undergrad at Bryn Mawr College, Women's College in Pennsylvania. Loved Bryn Mawr, loved Rutgers. And after law school, I went to go work for a law firm. At first, I thought I was going to do something social justice related but it didn't turn out that way. A lot of times when you're in law school and you're a good law student, they sort of push you to go the path of going into private practice, working at a law firm. So I ended up at a large firm in New Jersey, and I looked around and I saw absolutely no one who looked like me. Okay, I was the only Black person in my summer class. I looked up and I saw the partners all the way up the chain, and there was not a single Black partner at the firm. And at the time, the firm was sort of debating whether or not they should have a diversity committee. And I thought to myself, if this is where we are, when you clearly can see that you do not have any diversity at all, and you're debating whether or not you should have a diversity committee, for crying out loud, this is not the place where I need to be. Okay. I didn't unpack any of my boxes. I didn't take out any pictures. My office was bare. People were sort of speculating since, day 2 of starting there, is she going to leave? What's going on? And I left. I ended up meeting a partner at Seyfarth who said, and I was honest with him. It was probably the first time that I was ever honest with someone about my career and where I saw things going, because we're always taught to sort of, be professional, don't say anything, and carry on like everything is okay. And he said, well, if you're not having a good time there, then come over to Seyfarth. So I joined him, and I've been there for 8+ years. What was a real game changer for me, I will say internally, I had a lot of support. A lot of times people say, well, what's so different about your trajectory? How were you able to sort of survive at a law firm? And I'll say that there's nothing magical or special about me. I'm smart. I think there are many smart Black women who come through firms every day, but a lot of them are churned out. And the reason why they're churned out is because they're not given support and they're not being developed. Okay. When Paulette talked about that study that she did, Visible Invisibility, 14 years ago, and now the new one, Left Out, Left Behind, what Paulette talks about is that a lot of times for women of color, and particularly Black women, we're hyper visible in the law firm, right? People obviously know that we're there. We're one of probably just one or maybe one of two, right? We're visible in that respect. But oftentimes we're just sort of left there and for our careers to die, basically, right? You're not given any work, any substantive work that can help with your development. You're not mentored and developed in that way. If there are opportunities for you to sort of be seen, it'll be when the firm needs to use you on a pitch. And so you're in that room to help them get work because the potential client wants to see diversity. And so they put you out there for that purpose. But then when the work comes in, you're not assigned on the cases. And so you basically just sit there and are a prop, right? And that wasn't my experience. And I knew from when I left that firm the first time that I would always be in control of my career. I would not let anyone control my career. And that I would make sure that I found mentors and sponsors, people who could really, really help with my development. And I was able to find that at Seyfarth. Okay. And I'm very quick to say that my experiences are not necessarily going to be someone else's experiences. And I know I'm not naive to think that it's all because of, how good of a lawyer I am. I certainly know that that's not the case. And that I wouldn't be able to be where I am today if it wasn't for people literally knocking down the doors and making those calls and arguing on my behalf.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for sharing that, the importance of those sponsors and advocates. Michelle, how about you?
Yeah, so wow, you guys have had a great stories to share. And mine is very, it's funny, Paulette, as you talked about, not knowing what you don't know and, trying to figure it out, that really resonated with me. And also just having a career that's just been blessed. I mean, I'm just so humbly grateful for everything. It's been a heck of a ride. I started my career as an employment lawyer as well. I went to Rutgers undergrad and I went to Seton Hall Law School. Paulette has been a mentor of mine for as long as I can remember from when I first started out. So thank you, Paulette, for being a role model. And when I got out of law school, I went into a big Jersey firm, and I had the privilege of working across a variety of practice groups because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I got lucky enough to land on an employment case, and I fell in love with employment law. That firm at the time didn't have enough employment law work to go around. And everybody was kind of fighting over it. This was back in the mid 90s, and the firm was still growing the practice. I also happened to have had my first child. So you put those things together, and let's just say it became really clear to me that I wasn't going to be able to get the employment law work I wanted, and I wasn't going to be able to, work the hours that were required to really thrive there. And so I left. And I went to a small employment boutique firm in central New Jersey, where I spent 7 years kind of training up as an employment lawyer. It was one of the best experiences of my life because the attorneys, the partners in that firm, all practiced employment law and came at it from a different vantage point. Some were like hardcore litigators. Some were hardcore, folks who went into companies and helped them with policies and negotiations and things like that. So I learned like every angle of employment law, soup to nuts, with great mentors and sponsors. And I remember when I got to the partner stage, like partner track, when they, at the time, you got the green, or maybe you didn't get the green light. And they told me that they were going to put me up for partner and what that would require me to do. Build business, and all of that. I then had 3 little boys. My husband was also practicing at a huge New York firm. And I was like, you know what? One, I don't really like litigating. 2, I really don't have the time to put in to be a partner and try to build business on top of my job, on top of my family. So I think it's time for me to do something else. And it was at that point that something really significant happened to me that changed the course of my entire career. And that was one of the partners at the firm saying to me, Michelle, if you're going to leave, I want to just offer to you that you might want to try your hand at public service. She said, a career in public service is going to do things for you that you never could imagine. And I didn't think much of it. I just started kind of talking to people and calling mentors and looking for opportunities. And it just so happened that one of my other mentors, who worked for the state at the time as Attorney General, said to me, hey, I know one of the commissioners of one of the state departments is looking for an employment lawyer to come run his commissions, his departments rather, Office of EEO and Affirmative Action. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And I took what I call a calculated risk, going out and taking an opportunity that you never saw coming. And from that point, I never looked back. I mean, I worked in state government, I've worked in corporate America, and that EEO job took me through some in-house counsel jobs. It's taken me to my CDO route, and all of those experiences along the way, I truly believe prepared me for the role that I have today as CDO at KPMG.
Awesome, awesome. Wow, you ladies are impressive. So thank you for sharing your career journeys. Alnisa, you built your career gaining extensive experience practicing in state and federal courts, as well as administrative proceedings and matters involving various equal opportunity employment and labor issues. You also assume a client-facing role and counsel large Fortune 500 clients on various issues. I read that the average age to make law partner is 52, and you're a millennial who kicked down the door making partner in your 30s. And that's one heck of an accomplishment. So I don't want you to sell yourself short because it is a huge accomplishment. But what made you an outlier? You talked about this a little bit, but what advice would you give to other Black law professionals who may be struggling?
So I give a lot of advice. So something that I don't think I do at night, which a lot of people don't know, is that I have a lot of women of color who are my mentees. And I find myself weekly, at least twice a week, talking to women of color at firms who are having a really, really bad time. And for me, it's hard because a lot of these women are super bright. I mean, they went to some of the best schools across the country, and somehow they get to the law firm and they're told, well, they can't write, they can't do this, and they can't do that, and they're not given opportunities. And so I find myself having to deal with that very often, and I'm getting tired of it. You know, Paulette, I don't know how you deal with it, because honestly, like, I've only been doing it for 10 years, and I feel like now that I'm made partner, I'm getting sort of more and more and more of those calls and people just wanting to know, you know, how I did it and how I can offer support to them. And so it's hard. It's hard and it's challenging. One thing that I can say, I mean, you have to find the best law firm that works for you if you are working at a firm. And one thing that I used to tell these women, I used to always say, like, just stay the course. You know what I mean? Like, if you can stay the course, like, just do that. And then, you know, hopefully you'll be promoted, and if that's what you want to do. I'm now at this point, after hearing so many of these stories, I'm just like, listen, if you're at a good spot and it works for you, then do what you need to do to go up the ladder. But sometimes it's just not even worth staying the course, right? Like, mentally, it's not worth it. And it's a challenge, you know, to see so many people who are so incredibly smart and talented to just have their spirit sort of broken down. And so, like I said, I don't think there's anything special about me. Honestly, I don't. Like, you know, I think that I'm a good lawyer and I've put in the work. I think that what separates me from, you know, a lot of other people who enter the firms and who don't succeed there is because I have a lot of support. I have a lot of support internally from key people that matter. And I have a lot of support from clients who matter, who have no problem with picking up the phone and saying, hey, I know Annalisa's up for partner, just making sure that everything is going smoothly there. And so I think that's the difference.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, as Black women, regardless of what industry you're in, at some point you're going to experience some emotional abuse due to microaggressions and, you know, racism that happens in the workplace. So I think we all can relate to that. So thank you for being honest about that. And I wholeheartedly support, if you don't feel like you can thrive in a company, then you really should have an exit strategy. So thank you for sharing. So Paulette, this next question is for you, and it would literally take an hour just to run through all of your career accomplishments. So I'm going to hit our viewers with just a few milestones. Not only are you a former judge, you co-founded a successful private firm. You were the first African-American woman and first woman of color to head the American Bar Association. And in fact, you were president of both the American Bar and the National Bar Associations. And you've been identified as by the U.S. News as one of America's best lawyers in Ebony Magazine's Power 100. I could go on and on and on and on. So you now serve as senior partner and chief diversity and inclusion officer at Lockwood in the firm's labor and employment practice. I recently watched a video interview where you spoke about implicit bias in the law profession. And I want to expand that conversation to implicit bias overall, because it exists in every industry. And in examining the recent headlines about Amy Cooper, by all accounts, she may have not viewed herself as a racist, but clearly she had an implicit bias towards Black men. And she's representative of many individuals who are leading successful careers and positions in various industries who are managing people of color. So tell us about your work on implicit bias and what lessons both employers and employees can learn in weeding out the Amy Coopers that exist in the workplace.
So, she's known as Karen, but Central Park Karen, but we've got a Montclair Karen too. So I don't know whether you saw what happened to the two lawyers and the woman who was calling the police saying that he assaulted her. But those are the people who believe they're not racist. They're the ones who are the most tricky in any organization because they don't show themselves. They're not overt. And a lot of times they think they're the ones who say, it's not possible for me to be biased or prejudiced or whatever, because that's not the way I was raised. Or some people have said, I listen to jazz, so I could not possibly be biased. I've actually heard people say that they listen to jazz. And so I could not possibly be biased. Or I know how you're feeling because I had to hide, for example, that I was Jewish. I'm like, I can never hide, who I am. But, the thing is that everybody has to acknowledge that they've got some unconscious or implicit bias. You can't help it because as soon as you see a person, within 10 seconds, you start to formulate opinions about that individual. And it comes from things that are just not in your conscious mind. So only about 90% of our mind is unconscious. So, when you talk about lawyers, part of the thing that make us smart is because we can make snap decisions and think about things and analyze things very quickly. But a lot of times when you do that, that gets you into a lot of trouble because you really don't assess what's going on and you don't ask the necessary questions that you need to ask in order to remove any blind spots that you may have and any biases that you may have, because your natural instinct is to go back into the recesses of your mind and think about, what have I seen? What has somebody told me? As opposed to getting the information firsthand that you need in order to make a decision.
Can I just push back? I just want to push back a little bit on the question because I've been having this sort of internal struggle conversation with myself about implicit bias. Because with Amy, I think that Amy, what she showed wasn't implicit bias. I mean, bias, right? What she said was, I'm going to call the cops and tell them that there's an African-American man threatening my life, right? So I think that's sort of clear, right? Implicit bias is sort of annoying me with it nowadays is because people have been told since however long when, let's just even say with the legal profession. We all saw Paul's study that talked about how women of color are being treated in the legal profession, right? That when people give work, because we rely on the senior partners to give us work, right? When people give work, they tend to give work to people who look like them. Right? And oftentimes when the partner is, white, the thought is that they will tend to give work to folks who look like them. If you were told that you have this bias, and Paulette has been saying this like at least for 14 years or so, right? At what point does it just become bias, right? At what point? If someone keeps telling you that you might have this implicit bias that is the reason why you only give work to people who look like you, okay, now you know that. So why are you letting this go unchecked for years and years and years and years? So that's what's frustrating me with the conversation about implicit bias, because I feel like it takes a lot of responsibility away from folks.
Just to follow up, I'm not suggesting that Amy or Karen, whatever you want to call her, has implicit bias. She's just straight out biased. But what I say is that she hides. She hides in her regular environment so that she is the kind of person that you would not ordinarily pick out as your straight up racist. So she's the one that, to me, the type of person she is the most dangerous type of person. Yes, there are regular biases and implicit biases and a combination of both, and all of them demonstrate racism. So I am not suggesting that, because a person has an implicit bias, there are some things that people don't acknowledge that they have. Yes, they have it. They don't acknowledge that they have it, and that's not good. But all of it has something to do with racism. So there's no taking away from that.
And I want to jump in on this because Dorinda and Paulette, I live on this every single day in my work. So here's the thing, if to Paulette said it, if you have a brain, you have a bias. And I totally agree with Paulette. There is conscious bias and there is unconscious bias. But I have had an aha moment over the past few years in this work, wherein, I can usually see the conscious stuff. That's obvious. But with the unconscious piece, I've come to realize that as human beings, we just naturally gravitate towards what we're comfortable with. We all do it. We walk in a room, we look for people who look like us. We look for people we know. When I watch leaders, and even myself, I've caught myself doing it. When I'm looking to hire someone comes into the interview and says to me, oh yeah, we went to the same school, and I'm automatically disarmed and I'm having this whole conversation. This is what happens in our system. So you could have all the right policies and practices in the world, but as long as human beings who have a natural tendency to lean into their affinity, that unconscious bias is going to slip in and it is going to have them make those snap decisions every single day. So in the work that Paulette and I are doing, we are responsible for interrupting that and for teaching people to realize that it's there so that they can catch it and interrupt it and turn it before it takes over. And we have this kind of cycle of repetitive behavior going on and on again when we're picking and selecting and assigning things to people who are like us. And that to me is the key that we've got to crack to get past this.
And one of the reasons I think that, that we wrote in the 2006 study, one of the reasons why African Americans in particular have such a difficult time is because the people who are in power, they have no connection to us. They have no connection to us. They've got their daughters, they've got their wives, they've got their mothers, all of whom are white, which is why, other women can do better. And they've got men who they can relate to with sports. They see us as their nannies. And so they don't envision us in professional roles that we are capable of holding. And that's
okay.
what I look for. Sorry, I could go.
That's okay. That's okay. This conversation is a hot topic, so I appreciate you sharing, but I know we only have an hour, so I want to get through everything. For those of you who are viewing, I see a lot of comments, but I don't see specific questions. So if you do have questions, please type them in so I can get to a few. But I do want to share this feedback from John Holly. He says, this is a virtual career day that would be so valuable for women and men seeking to get into or progress further in the legal field. Strong, varied experiences and approaches. So ladies, you guys are doing a phenomenal job. Michelle, this next question is for you. And so, when we first met, I was told that you were one of the fiercest, baddest EEO, lawyers in the industry. You had a stellar reputation, but you made a strategic decision to use your talent to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as a result, you propelled to an accomplished C-suite executive and partner at one of the top 4 accounting firms in the globe. Yes. It goes without saying that you are a powerful influencer and thought leader and someone I'm proud to call a friend. And you would help advance DEI, not only in the US, but globally. Just a few of your accolades include Winds of Change Award by the Forum on Workplace Inclusion, Top 100 Under 50 Executive Leader by Diversity MBA, Top Executives in Corporate Diversity by Black Enterprise, Diverse Attorney of the Year by the New Jersey Law Journal, 2020 Top Diversity Star. You were inducted into the Rutgers African American Alumni Hall of Fame. I mean, it's just incredible. So I recently read an article in the Economist magazine where you stated affirmative action has not worked in corporate America. Black professionals do not want the scales tipped in their favor because when they get a seat at the table, they will not have a voice or sense of belonging. So we all know that representation in Black E-suite and C-suite leaders is dismal in corporate America. Even though we know that there is plenty of qualified talent, give us your perspective on why Black professionals aren't receiving equitable opportunities in corporate America and what can be done at both the corporate organizational level and on the professional individual level to drive substantive change and impact.
That's a great question, loaded question, but I'm going to try to unpack it. So I actually think there are 2 things going on. And I think that it's because there's this shared responsibility, and that both parties are not holding up necessarily their end of the deal in many instances. First of all, our organizations. I mean, our organizations have to get better at proactively and strategically, right, advancing, developing, and supporting talent. So like Alnisa described her experience at her firm, mentorship, sponsorship, full support, people who have wrapped their arms around her to get her where she is today. We need more of that in corporations. I think for so long, corporations, again, they put the policies in place, they put the processes in place, and they just think it's just going to work out. Well, it's not, because people are making the people decisions. And if the people using those processes, again, are falling to their natural affinities, and they are not proactively sponsoring and mentoring, like Alnisa described, what she got, then people are going to flounder. And Alnisa's example of being in a place where you're the only one of anything, and you look up and you don't see anyone that looks like you, that coupled with the lack of sponsorship, the lack of mentorship, the lack of you being, picked to be on the engagement, to have the stretch assignment because the majority partner is, looking for someone who looks like him or her, it is totally debilitating, totally debilitating. And a lot of times we opt out, we walk away, or suddenly we become a performance issue. That's one piece of it. The other piece of this, candidly, is I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of Black professionals, many of whom I mentor over the last decade or so, where there seems to be this assumption, and I know I had it when I was coming up in my career, that if you work hard, it's just all going to work out. And that is not true. You have to own your career. You have to get what you want. You have to make your expectations and your aspirations known. You have to raise your hand, and you have to ask for feedback constantly. You have to be your career advocate. And unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of professionals, not even just Black professionals, but I don't think a lot of younger professionals coming into their careers get that, because they're so focused on, getting the grades, getting the high scores on the tests, that they don't realize they have to own their career. So I think that to get past all of this, we need to handle the system, right? And the decision makers, and what I talked about before around, them leading inclusively and proactively. But then we also have to get to our junior professionals who are coming up the ranks, and we have to make sure that they understand they have an obligation to own and navigate their career. I mean, that's how I got out of my law firm. I told them, look, I don't want to be a partner here. I think I want to do something different. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I might do this, I might do that. They're like, well, hey, why don't you go do this? Had I not said anything, and had I sat there, I can only imagine how unhappy I would have been, because I did not want to litigate, right? So I had to vocalize that, and I had to go get what I want. And I've been doing that ever since. And I think that's what we need to do to make this better for all of us as we move forward in our careers.
I love that.
Take
Don't
a
wait.
lesson from Michelle.
Yes. I love that. Take ownership of your career. Don't wait for the opportunity. Create the opportunity. So Paulette and Alnisa, I'd love for you to weigh in on this.
I agree with what Michelle said, with taking ownership of your career. And, one thing, I've had this Women of Color mentoring group since 2006 and 2007. Alnisa used to come, but she put us down. Just joking. I'm joking, Alnisa. But one of the things that I try to impress upon them, because a lot of times people who have not had the experience that Alnisa has had, they go in knowing that they're smart, and these people are not giving them work. They're saying unkind things about them. Suddenly they can't write. It's like when you cross that threshold, you did not become mediocre. They hired you for a reason. They hired you because you're brilliant, because you're talented. That did not go away when you signed the dotted line saying, I am going to work with you. So you have to always keep that in mind and get whatever kind of reinforcements that you need to keep you pumped up, because it doesn't come naturally for everybody. And so you need somebody who will help you in that regard, and get an accountability partner to help you to do that. Check in with somebody else to to make sure that you're staying on track with the goals that you've set for yourself. And a lot of times when you have that kind of accountability partner, then you're more inclined to do that. And accountability goes on the other side too, because the people who are in charge, because if it's not measured, it's not going to get done. And so a lot of times, a lot of these companies and organizations, they have goals and core values of their organization. And a lot of times diversity and inclusion is one of them. Well, you have to treat diversity and inclusion like any other value. Whatever is required for the particular value or goal, that we're going to make X amount of dollars and we're going to do whatever it takes to do that, then that's the same way you have to treat a diversity and inclusion. And just as there are consequences when you don't reach your goals, your sales goals or whatever, you have to have consequences if you don't meet your diversity and inclusion goals. And I think until there are consequences, whether it's a carrot or stick, I think that people, they will think that this is something that's ancillary. This is something that's optional. This is something that I don't necessarily have to do. It's a nice thing to do, and it doesn't really affect me.
Lisa, real quick, if you have something to chime in here, because we have 2 questions that I want to get to.
We can get to the questions. I would just reiterate what everyone else said.
Okay. So Leslie is asking, how do you cultivate getting a sponsor, someone in a position of power, to aid creating opportunities? I find it is often easier to find someone willing to mentor, but harder to bridge the gap above that into sponsorship. Anybody want to take that?
So so usually people will not necessarily volunteer to be your sponsor. You can, one of the ways that you can do it, I like to find out, it's old, and you can't necessarily go by what I say because I'm older too. So, but I think that, you should, if you're looking for somebody to really sponsor you, find out what that person likes, outside of work. Find out what's interesting. I will tell you a story, and I can say it now because I've been gone away from this place for a long time. But one of the things I would do is I would get into the office very early, and the people I wanted to be my sponsors and to look out for me, I would go into their offices and look at their pictures and see what kind of things they enjoyed. And then I would develop expertise in that so that I could be able to talk to them about it. And it served me well at the time. It didn't serve me well in what I consider the long term, but it also helped me to understand people, and it also helped me to broaden my perspective on things and caused me to read things that I would not have ordinarily read. But the thing is that you can't wait. You need a sponsor early on, and if somebody agrees to be your mentor, I think you tell them, because that person can turn into a sponsor. I want to be successful, and I think that my success will translate into success for you. So if I'm successful, you're successful as well.
And I'll chime in on that and say, one of the things that I was sitting here like really thinking this through, because when I think about the instances in which I've seen people show up as a sponsor for someone, the people didn't know that they were actually pounding their hand on the table about them. So my point is you don't always know that somebody is sponsoring you. And I think about my own career trajectory when I was at an organization working with Dorinda, and I was working as an employment lawyer. Unbeknownst to me, someone was watching me navigate the organization. They were watching the way I led cross-firm initiatives. They were watching the way I spoke in public. They were watching all of these things about me that I didn't know they were watching. And when I got the call about becoming the firm's next chief diversity officer, I remember going, well, why me? And I was told that I had a sponsor that had been watching me and observing me, and that this person thought I fit the skill sets and the qualifications necessary to soar in the role. I later found out who that was, and I'm going to tell you, I never in a million years would have imagined that person was my sponsor. So I say that to say, you may not think you can find a sponsor, but you actually may have a sponsor. The key is to build your brand, know and show up so that people understand, what it is that you do, engage beyond your day job so that people can take notice of you. So when they're in those rooms, making those decisions, putting names on the table, people are going to think and say, hey, I know that person and I've seen that person, and they're sponsoring you and you don't even realize it at that time.
There's one more aspect to this discussion, a question from Kayla. And she says, how do we keep Black women in firms without having to tolerate the intolerable, so that we can have some more mentors and sponsors in key positions that look like us?
So I think that was part of a little bit about what I talked about earlier. I used to be one of those people that told women of color to stay the course, right? Because I firmly believe that if there were more people like us in positions of power, that would change sort of the dynamics of these law firms. And I still believe that. But I just don't believe anymore that you should stay at a law firm that no longer sort of, that doesn't support you in any way, right? I don't think it's sort of worth one's mental health. And so you have to find the right place where you can really thrive and develop. And I think it's hard, it's hard because clearly it is hard, right? Because it wouldn't be 0.75% of us, right? It is hard. But I think now, as women, as Black women in particular, we need to understand this moment that we're in and use this moment. And I hate using the word use, but use this moment in order to hold your firms accountable.
Thank you, Anissa. Before I ask my final question, I want to remind the viewers to register for our next LeaderCast on July 16th. We're going to have Micheline Davis, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at RWJ Barnabas Health, and Quita Highsmith, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Genentech, discussing the need for more Black C-suite leaders in healthcare and how they're working to address racial healthcare disparities. And that's a really important conversation. So be sure to tune in and to spread the word. So this is the final question, ladies. Give one piece of advice to Black women who aspire to break barriers in leadership, regardless of their industry. And Paulette, I'll start with you.
Of course you start with me. So I believe that you should not try and change who you are, that you always bring your authentic self to the table. I believe that from time to time you have to do some slight compromise, but never lose your identity as to who it is you are. I don't believe in doing a lot of code switching. Maybe that's why I'm not rich, but I think that in order to be the best and make the biggest difference in whatever it is that you're doing, believe in what it is that you're doing, be happy in what it is that you're doing, and bring everything that you have to whatever role that you have at the moment. Because even if you are in a temporary status, you still bring as much as you have, because you can still get something out of it that you can use at a later time.
Love it. Authenticity. Michelle, how about you?
Yeah, I ditto what Paulette said. And the other two things that come to me on this one is, one, trust your gut. I know that may sound kind of corny, but Dorinda, you and I have had lots of conversations around this. I do listen to my inner self. And when I'm feeling a certain kind of way and something's hitting me really hard, I know it's something I need to deal with. Maybe it's time to make a move. Maybe it's time to have a hard conversation with my leader, whatever it may be, trust it. Don't let it sit there, because it will cause you unnecessary pain and distress. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. And the second thing that we didn't touch on a lot, but I want to just stress this, is that it's not only important to be, excellent at what you do, like we've described before, right? But it's really important to build relationships. For all of the reasons that we talked about before, the example that Paulette gave about, meeting partners and finding things in common by looking at pictures and things like that. You have to build relationships. as I think about my navigation through my corporate experience, in every single move, there was a connection to someone who gave me a connection to something that I might not have otherwise gotten a connection to. So it's really important to build strategic, intentional relationships in an authentic way. And that's a deep one for a whole nother conversation, but it's important to keep in mind.
Very, very important. Thank you for sharing that. Alnisa, how about you?
So I will just add, because I think sort of one common theme in everything that both Michelle and Paulette mentioned is back to what Michelle said earlier, is owning your career. I mean, don't let anybody sit back and tell you what you're going to do and what type of lawyer you're going to be. And I learned that earlier when I was at the New Jersey firm. They happened to put me in the asbestos practice group, and I was supposed to be this asbestos lawyer. And I said, there is no way in hell I'm practicing asbestos. And I'm sure you would not have put your favorite lawyer in the asbestos practice group. So I knew I had to get out of there. But that taught me a lesson very early, to speak up for yourself and to own your career. No one's going to tell me what type of law I'm going to practice or what kind of lawyer I'm going to be. And so I do that every single day. I mean, I don't let things fester. If I have an issue, I raise my hand and I sort of address, bring that issue to the person who can fix it for me. And that's what I do, and that's what I've always done.
I love it, love it, love it. Own your career. Ladies, you have been phenomenal. This has been a great discussion on leadership, on the power of Black women. I truly appreciate you. Do any of you have any final words, anything you want us to look out for, any initiatives you're working on that you want us to be aware of before we end?
I'd like to hear Paulette tell us again the name of that study that you just released, Paulette, so we know where to find that.
It's Left Out and Left Behind: The Hurdles, Hassles, and Heartaches of Long-Term Careers of Women of Color. I can send it to you, Michelle. And Dorinda, I can send it to you if you want to post it on your site.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And so, the very sad thing is that, some of the things that, we talk to people ostensibly who were 20 years in practice, but there were so few, we had to lower the years to 15. So it's difficult out there. We have a hard time, and even among women of color, it's not a monolith, because experiences even among women of color are very, very different. So.
Well, because of you, there are going to be some other women who come behind you. So we are appreciative of all your work, for being on our LeaderCast, and for showing us how we win anyway. That is our theme at LEAD360. I want you guys to have a good evening, and God bless.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.